South Africa's fiscal squeeze has been a bone of contention for years now, long before the pandemic reached our shores. To help us paint a picture of the current economic landscape, we're joined by Wits Business School's Professor Jannie Rossouw, who talks to us via the virtual platform. Prof, a very good morning to you and thank you very much for your time. Let's start off with a paper that was written by a number of co-researchers, included among them Professor Houseman. And the words they used was that South Africa had embarked on an unsustainable fiscal trajectory over the last decade. My question to you, therefore, is can government continue can it afford the rising civil service remuneration? And you include in there the need, a very clear need, for social assistance to those who cannot make ends meet.
Good morning, Polani, and good morning to the viewers. I've been warning about fiscal unsustainability in South Africa since 2013, when I started on the research on the possibility of South Africa facing a fiscal cliff. So I'm a bit surprised that people now take note of Professor Houseman's paper and say the country is in fiscal difficulty. I've been warning about this since 2013. And many people just didn't listen to the warnings. So we are really in trouble now, and we need to figure out how to get out of the current difficulties.
Well, Prof, you would have heard just before we got into this conversation, running a story about the struggling state-owned entities or state-owned companies. And I want to start with the one that has been said over time that it simply cannot be allowed to fail, and that's Eskom. What are your thoughts about what the minister ought to say today?
No, I agree, Eskom cannot be allowed to fail, but my concern is that we still do not have enough transparency at Eskom, and I've asked on more than one occasion that all Eskom's contracts, past, present and future, should be published for public scrutiny, and then we will understand what's going on. I've raised this question with Mr. De Ruyter, whose excuse was that his suppliers will not like the publication of the contracts. Now, if your suppliers don't like the publication of the contracts they've entered in with you, something is wrong. Your suppliers might be taking you for a ride. So I still plead for the publication of all contracts at Eskom so that we can see what's really going on and who is bluffing who.
Let's talk about other SOEs. There is a state-owned arms manufacturer, that's Denel. You have Transnet, the Land Bank. Which of those do you think could be allowed to fail, if we are to use the same terminology?
Yeah, Polani, the problem is that depending on which source you use, South Africa either has 132 state-owned enterprises or 717 state-owned enterprises. So the first thing that we need in South Africa is a list of all state-owned enterprises. Just list them from A to Z alphabetically. South Africans need to know which organizations, which businesses are regarded as state-owned enterprises. It's very unsatisfactory that you can't get a complete list. And then secondly, of course, there are many state-owned enterprises that are very efficiently and effectively run, and we're grateful for those. However, they are the problem children and they are the repeat offenders. And we need to deal with the repeat offenders. As I've said, we need Eskom. We cannot run this country without Eskom. But we really don't need SAA. I've suggested 6 years ago that the government should either close it or give it away. That is still my viewpoint. The same with Denel. Sell it, close it, give it away. We don't need Denel. The same with Alexkor, the struggling diamond mining company. Get rid of it. So those state-owned enterprises that the government is subsidizing and it's costing us money that are not mission critical to South Africa's economic success, the government should either sell or give away if they can get any takers, or simply close. If the government listened to me 6 years ago and closed SAA, we would have saved the taxpayers more than 30 billion rands. With 30 billion rands, we could have done a lot of things in this country, including building a lot of low-cost housing.
Let's move away from the SOEs, Prof, and go back to the issue of social spending. There is mounting pressure for the introduction of a basic income grant. Can we afford this?
Well, in short, I understand the mounting pressure for basic income grant, but we need to understand where the money for this will come from. And as it is, we see pressure on government finances from many sides, amongst others the fact that the country is running a deficit before borrowing of about 6% of GDP, which is clearly sustainable in an economy that grows at a rate of, say, 1.7 or 1.9% per annum. So if we want to introduce a basic income grant, we will have to spend less money on something else. Now, these struggling SOEs immediately come to mind. We need to get rid of them. But there are other areas that the government can also save a lot of money, like, for instance, closing the Department of Small Business Development, which has really done nothing in this country. I don't know why we have such a department, because their functions will now be duplicated in the office of the president with a red tape administrator to get rid of red tape. So we need to go through government expenditure and find areas where we can save. Another area that comes to mind is our whole Southern African Customs Union agreement, where South Africa is one of the most generous donor countries in the world to our customs union partners, Eswatini, Lesotho, Namibia, and then, of course, Botswana.
Yeah.
We pay away huge amounts of development aid to those countries that we simply can no longer afford. The same is true in the Senerage sharing agreement with Namibia, Eswatini, and Lesotho, where there's a huge development aid component. We can simply not afford that. And while I'm talking about not being able to afford, we cannot give 50 million rands worth of food aid to Cuba. We simply cannot afford it. So if we want the basic income grant, we need to figure out where we can save money, redeploy such money, and pay for a basic income grant.
Professor Jannie Rossouw, so much to talk about. Unfortunately, let's leave the conversation there. He is the professor of the Wits Business School and giving us his thoughts on what the finance minister should be talking about.